And today's discussion is going to be really exciting. It's focused on how to drive organic impact with press content. So content that sometimes gets overlooked, certainly underutilized, and not often a focus of content marketers. We have a very special guest today. I'm so excited to have her. But before I get into that, a few housekeeping notes. If you want to ask any questions about anything we're discussing or anything related to, kind of media as we talk about PR, content strategy, search, or anything under the sun, ask it in the search bar. If we get to it in line or at the end when we do a Q&A, anything we don't answer or don't get to, we'll get to you via email after the show. One other housekeeping note, the recording will be sent to you in the next couple days. While you're at it, go check out, we have over 30 content strategy webinars from amazing people like Kevin Indig from G2, Andy Crestodina from Orbit, Hamlet Batista on how to use Python in search and content strategy. Just an amazing group of people to check out. All right, cool. If you look at more than one recording, shoot me a note at jeff@marketmuse.com. Give me some feedback on those. All right. Today's guest is the CEO of Ruby Media Group. She's an award-winning public relations and media relations expert. She's often asked to be on public appearances on TV, major broadcasts as a social media expert, talking about things like tech bias, cancel culture, and all the things that are just amazing concepts for today. We're going to get into those in more detail. Kris Ruby, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, if anyone's not familiar with what you do, what Ruby Media Group focuses on, and generally the mission of those efforts.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me, Jeff. I'm really excited to be here today and to be doing this webinar with you and MarketMuse. So I started my company over a decade ago. So 13 years in business, Ruby Media Group. I started out primarily doing social media marketing, but now we've really changed to full service, traditional PR and digital public relations and a content marketing agency as well. So we work with a lot of people, doctors specifically in the healthcare vertical, and build their personal brands online through a holistic approach to content, personal branding, social, and public relations.
Excellent. And one thing I thought before we get started in kind of the discussion about organic impact with press content, there's a couple of things is, how do you think about, and I notice often you're saying, personal brand is company brand. How does that relate to healthcare, and how do you see that generally for other types of businesses and maybe things that go wrong or people aren't thinking about that critically?
Yeah, so the way that my approach to getting publicity for a doctor is that no one is necessarily interested in what that practice is doing first. They're interested in the educational component of what that doctor has to say first and foremost before getting press for their practice. So our approach is, if you build the brand of the doctor, you then build the brand of the practice, and not the other way around.
And I think that speaks to any type of business. It's, do you have personalities? Are you providing insight? Are you providing expertise with how you put forth, the media that you have on your site? I think that just speaks to, MarketMuse's mission, and certainly has been yours in everything that I've consumed that, you all promoted and otherwise. And we're going to get into some different flavors of situations on, protecting personal brand and also amplifying it as we talk today. But I'm going to kick off and just, what would you say to somebody who doesn't consider publicity and media coverage as part of their content strategy? What are they missing out on, and what are the things that you typically see when you start working with a client that maybe is just getting into this?
Yeah, so I would say that they are making a mistake and they're basically missing out on everything. So I think there's this old school way of approaching PR, which is maybe you'd hire one traditional PR firm, and then you'd hire an SEO firm, or maybe also hire a content firm, and then a marketing firm. And I think there's lots of problems with that scenario, because all of these things really need to work together. They all impact the other areas. I have a client that's a cardiologist, and one of the things that he says is that his tagline is the legs are the windows to the heart. And he's talking about, you know, leg health and the arteries in your legs and those veins impact the arteries obviously in your heart as well. The blood has to flow to all of those different parts of the body. And I think the same is very true in content marketing and in public relations. So what you're doing in one area impacts how everything else can flow in the other area. So it's not just going to be that you make a change in one place and that doesn't have a ripple effect to every other part of your marketing or PR campaign.
And do you feel like that is often because they don't feel like they can measure the results of such a campaign? Or is it just that they haven't even thought about the fact that having 4 agencies focused on one goal is going to be complicated?
Yeah, I think it's the latter out of those 2 options. And I do think that, you know, one of the great things about PR is that you can measure. There are ways to certainly measure it more and more these days with looking at an increase in brand lift or brand traffic that a PR hit can secure, or even an increase in overall domain authority from start to finish of a public relations campaign. But again, those are things that I think that the agency is thinking about ideally, and the client most of the time may not be at all.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. When you talk about, you know, you're speaking the language of some of the search engine optimization professionals that might be on the call about improving overall authority, the ability to be successful with future content about the topics that you covered or you received that hit on. But for someone that's not kind of PR savvy, what do you define as a hit and kind of what goes into that process?
Sorry. Okay, so a press hit is basically another way of saying media coverage or press coverage, and what that means is that the agency, has pitched you to a journalist, and the pitch was successful in getting you placed in that media outlet. So if I say that we secured a hit for you, it usually looks like us sending you over a link, and that link has your quote in the story. Gotcha.
You know, some of our maybe a link builders in the audience are like, oh, that's what she meant by that. I do that all day, every day. But no, it's always great to kind of connect the dots between the way that you see it and you know the success that you have for clients. And when those things manifest as, you know, maybe an interview on a major broadcast or otherwise, what are you typically having as like a post-mortem for that effort with that doctor? How are you talking with them about their experience or the success from it? And how are you maybe asking her, what do you want to do next, or what are those types of processes when you have a successful hit and you're taking stock of how well it went?
That's a good question. I would say I actually never ask them what they want to do next. I tell them what we will do next, but I do not ask them what they want to do next, because what they want to do next may not actually be what's right or what's feasible in any way. And so, that's one of the I could ask them that question and they could say, I want to be on Ellen tomorrow, or I want to be on the Today Show. So in PR, it's often dangerous to say those questions because it can lead to very unrealistic expectations. So
I think it really connects to content strategy, though. I mean, as we discussed it, because sometimes it's about the business goals and what are the overall business goals. I want to own this topic. Sometimes it's about competitive risks. Sometimes it's about just getting quick wins or building authority and building trust. And when you kind of know what the overall goal is, kind of what you want to do tomorrow, may be written for you. It may be clear, that plan may already be built. So I think that's really appropriate. So when you are, when you have success with a client with, these types of experiences and this type of media and this type of, robust content, how do you try to communicate that this should be a signal that they need to break down the silos of having news and having press content as sometimes a separate site? What are the types of things that you're often kind of giving advice on as to, make their content presence one unique vision and voice?
Sure. So one of the things that I noticed, and I noticed this particularly, every time a press placement or hit would come out, I would look at how much of that interview was actually used. So let's say someone has to write paragraphs or walls of text for interview answers for a reporter, but then only one line is used out of that in the actual quote in the placement. And the placement is obviously, again, the hit, it's what is live with the mention or a link back to that site. And so what I realized is that there was this huge opportunity. And I think that 99% of most PRs are leaving this opportunity on the table because, again, they're just looking at that hit. Oh, we got the hit, we got the client placed, we're moving on to the next thing. What I started to realize is that it's very hard to get clients to write this content themselves to begin with. So how can I make the most of that content? And so what we started to do is keep track of all of the unused interview answers in a Microsoft Word document. And that has become the impetus for a whole new service really that we launched, which is that we can take your publicity content and your unused media answers and turn this into amazing content and help you increase your domain authority and authority online in general. And it was just, I did this with one client, and I think I showed you it was about a 25-page document in Word. I mean, that could be 5 different ebooks. It could be used to repurpose for so many different things. And I would say the same thing is true with podcast interviews. So I was faced with clients that didn't necessarily want to sit and write content. I couldn't get them to write it down, but I could get them to do a podcast interview for an hour. And so let's say for every one podcast interview they did, I would have a Word document of a transcription that was 6,000 or 7,000 words. So
you're speaking my language. This is my favorite part of discussions that we've had is, for content marketers and for repurposers, for people who think critically about repurposing. And if you look at our content strategy webinar series and the recordings, there's an amazing one, a couple back about repurposing that just goes hand in hand with some of the things that Kris is speaking about. But yeah, what are the artifacts that come out of prepping for, a major broadcast interview? And like you said, it's, thousands of words, or, the interview has thousands of words that could be repurposed into all different types of media. What are some examples of ones that you've done after you have 35 pages worth of prep and you only got a 1-minute spot? What do you do with that, and how do you make that shine?
Well, so what I do is I put everything into that Word document, and then what I do is keyword research. So I start actually looking at, okay, when I put all of these things together, I can see that this is going to be an article on XYZ health topic, and then I'm going to look up that health topic and see what's the search volume for that, and are people searching for that? And it's not only that, it also really is the most powerful tool ever from a public relations standpoint, because that then dictates the future of the content marketing strategy and the PR strategy. So I can say, wait a second, I noticed you're talking about all of these things, but people aren't necessarily searching for those things. So it would really help me based on this keyword research if actually we shift our PR strategy and we pitch you to talk about this topic instead. And, we started leveraging this tactic even with podcast interviews to create our own briefs. Because we found that it was much easier when we're doing a podcast transcription afterwards. It's much easier to start with a brief than to retroactively create a brief out of the interview without having one to begin with.
It's funny how that works, especially when you're talking to someone who builds briefs as part of their business. But yeah, it's so true. I mean, just to make sure you don't have any blind spots and, reminders, even subject matter experts are just naturally not going to mention something over the course of this conversation. I mean, we're naturally going to forget, 15 of the most important concepts that relate to PR and media relations, but we're not going to know that until the end. But how can we create better notes? How can we build things that if we did get to them when we're talking, it's going to actually improve the overall value of the transcription. I mean, just thinking about it that way is so novel. I think for most people, you can actually prepare such that you'll cover these things in what feels like a natural conversation. Make sure you cover those topics, and the value of that interview is going to be better for you. From overall promotion.
What I've learned also is when we talk about topic clusters in general, there is a way to integrate public relations into these clusters if you're doing it right. And so I think so much time is spent planning keywords and content around those clusters on your own site, but very little time is typically spent thinking about how you can integrate your media interviews into those clusters as well, and choosing opportunities that align with that. And so this gets me to MarketMuse and how I discovered one of these lessons by using your platform, which I know I shared with you, but I want to share with the audience here, which is that I learned on my own site, when I ran my site through your platform, I had all of these pages that were considered thin content, and I couldn't figure out why. And so then I looked, and it was because every time I personally, as a pundit or a TV commentator, every time I was on air, I would just post the video, I'd post the URL with the same thing, social media expert Kris Ruby on Fox News or whatever it was, but I had 20 URLs that are all the same. And I had just basically like hundreds of pages of thin content from all these media appearances. And then I started to notice a pattern. When I looked at my client sites as well, or basically everyone I've ever worked with, they all have this same issue, which is that they spend a lot of time creating content on the blog section of their site and very little time building out content around press and media interviews. So I'm on a mission to help people change that and to realize that I think that there is this, like you were on the mission first, in all honesty, I just learned it from you, but specifically with the press pages, I would say I'm on that mission because there's hundreds of pages of content that could be optimized and people rarely look at that part of their site. They just throw it up there and think I'm done, moving on to the next press it.
Rich media optimization is a frontier. I mean, it is, and it's been, you know, something that we've focused on for a long time. I personally have focused on it for, gosh, now well over a decade. It sounds silly, but yeah, like transcription's only part one. I mean, and being able to, like you've done, you know, annotating those transcriptions, integrating them with the rest of your site, expanding them with content that illustrates what you're trying to do. I mean, like you said, education is the key for that personal brand. Nobody cares about your practice. They care about what you know that might be special, and getting that expertise onto paper and into, you know, into their the things that they're reading. When you're looking at those, you know, those pitch decks and that you've used and the materials, what are some nuggets that you've seen that have caused you to say, well, I need to replicate this with every client? And what are ones that, you know, you've run into that you might shy away from, or mistakes that you see?
You mean in terms of the actual content from the pitches that I sent out, or?
Yeah, what do you see any parallels like across multiple different pitch decks that you're like, oh wow, I always need to have this type of content on my site after, you know, or to prepare for this?
Yeah, so my biggest takeaway here is that people learn in different ways. And so some people are, you know, they want that video content. Other people want to read it, and other people need to hear it. And you need to hit people in all three components, all of those areas. And so I think that I'm seeing people make mistakes when they only focus on audio, right? So I've done a ton of courses and trainings basically every night since the pandemic started. And I will say this, some people have these amazing courses, but they're just videos, and then they don't put transcripts at the bottom, and I won't even watch it. Because I want to read, I want to be able to copy and paste things into a Word document, and then that's how I learn, right? If you think back to college or when people were in school, how do you learn best? And so I think there's this problem that people forget about that when they're actually in the work world, right? So they spend all this time creating content, and they create it in the way that they learn best, and they forget that other people learn differently than they do.
Absolutely. I mean, you're speaking my language. It's definitely something that you have to think about. You don't know your persona as well as you think you do. You know, just go look at your device, the devices that read your pages. Go look at the, you know, the instances where you have, you know, maybe you do have a podcast recording on a page or a video on a page, and do you really feel like everyone's consuming that in the same way? Well, you know, your analytics will tell you another story. So that's just an opportunity to appeal to more you know, to more learners. So like not having that content wrapping up and telling the story of your session, maybe not having audio, maybe not having video, maybe not having, you know, simpler versions or more in-depth versions. You know, it's just marketing. You're not appealing to all stages of the buy cycle. You're not appealing to all possible personas. And I think that that's, you know, the biggest thing that you kind of told me that you're focused on, and that's really exciting. It's just another lens. It's the lens of PR on what we see all the time, not considering the pipeline, not considering personas, not building content for all user intent profiles. And I think that really tells a story that you were, you know, walking through. So when you were, you know, when you've been focusing on press mentions into a traditional content strategy, how do you give advice there? You know, do you say, hey, we want to get at least this many per month? Do you say, you know, here's a tier 1 mention, here's a tier 2? How do you construct a good press plan, or a good, like, what's your hit goals for a particular client?
So the way that I practice PR is very much dictated by the news cycle. And I think that's also different than a lot of traditional PRs in general, where I think that they just sort of this spray and pray approach where they'll just pitch anyone or look at what that person has written about previously and then send them pitches. I don't work that way. There's proactive versus reactive PR. I like to react to people that are already saying, I'm writing the story, do you have an expert? Because then the likelihood of that actually happening is significantly higher than me coming up with that idea for them and seeing if they're actually gonna write that story. So we, pay a lot of money for all these different subscription services, for example, where we have access, not only nationally, but internationally as well, for what people are working on. And I will say this, that's also important when we're talking about PR for SEO and digital first strategies. Some people think, oh, I mean, if you truly care about increasing your DA, then why do you care if the story is in Europe versus here? Right? A link is a link, and DA, domain authority is domain authority. So why does it matter if it's coming from here or coming from there?
A link is a link. Who's that person? Please send them my way. Yeah, I mean, it's so true. I mean, it's not even just that. It's what content, what topics does that source cover, and are they relevant to your business? Because a link is not a link. DA is not a real actionable in isolation metric. I mean, that's one of the core tenets of MarketMuse. Is you need to know where you're strong, what topics you're covering, where you have existing strength, where you have unfair competitive advantage. But if you're getting links from somewhere that isn't semantically related and isn't providing actual, connective tissue and value, that number is just a number. It's not going to help you in the future. So I think that's really poignant. So yeah.
So I think what I mean by that, let me clarify what I mean. What I mean is that when we're talking about media outlets and links from media outlets with high domain authorities, right, we're talking about 60 or 80 plus, whether that media outlet is in the US or it's in Europe, if the topic is still within your wheelhouse and it's from a trusted media authority originally, or I think some people say, well, why do I need to be quoted on my area of expertise in this other place? And what I'm trying to say is, well, why would you not? If it's within your topic cluster, you should be. That's what I'm trying to say there.
Oh, you're totally right. And yeah, you are 100% right. If the site is in another geo, it doesn't matter if they are relevant. And then you hit it right on the head. It's why are you thinking about, only maybe the channels I mean, I think that happens probably a lot. They want to be on the media channels they know.
Yes.
For sure.
And so I think what has happened with this proliferation of digital PR is that we have so many more channels to consider now, right? And I think when the way we break it down is there's regional press, which is, maybe you're a dentist here and you just want press coverage within the local magazines, newspapers, outlets where you are. And then there's national in that regard. Maybe you want to be on primetime or a talk show or the 6 p.m. news. And then there's trade media, which is you want to be featured in the medical trade publications or other dental publications. So we break it down, and that's what we ask people, which one do you want to be in out of those three?
Okay, so you're building kind of tiers by the type of channel. Do you ever have them say that they only want to be in one of those channels, and then you have to kind of readjust your strategy? Or?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So what we have is people, I want to be a national. We say, okay, well, you have to start with local. People don't just start out at national. So the way that I explain it is that it has to snowball. So it goes, I would say, local, and then trade, and then national. And I think that you need time built into it to achieve those results properly.
Yeah, you're not getting on Ellen tomorrow. Sorry. I can see that happening. It's the expectation setting being so significant. I mean, you really have to have an exciting pitch. I mean, so what goes into building that, kind of a package for someone who maybe nobody knows, like to show that they're an authority if they don't already have site content on their site. And then that's a huge bear, right? Someone who has no content on their site and wants to be known as an expert. Are you building out, does that media plan or does that package have to be like 50 pages of like research references, or what does that look like?
So this is a really great point that you bring up, and I'm so glad that you did, which is that in order for us or anyone to pitch you to the media as an expert, you actually have to be an expert. So PRs are not magicians. We can't make you an expert if you're not truly an expert, right? Thought leadership means thinking your own thoughts. It doesn't mean that someone else can think them for you and then put them out. So you really, in order to actually, and I think, by the way, journalists can tell the difference too if someone really is a thought leader. And that's why it's not just that you're going to hire a PR firm and you're not going to do any work and you're not going to write content and we're going to get the same results. It just doesn't happen that way. So thought leaders really need to be actively involved in the building process. And so that means sometimes what we'll say is, if you want press, here's what I need you to do. Join these organizations, be active in the organizations, do these webinars, start speaking on podcasts, like do all of these things first before I'll pitch you anywhere, because I need to see more of your activity as an expert in this area before I can pitch you anywhere.
You just haven't earned it yet? Is that basically what you just haven't earned it yet? I mean, that's basically the way that I think about it. It's, you haven't put yourself out there, you haven't illustrated your expertise, you haven't exhibited your expertise. And so, why would you want me to bring you out of the garage and into stage one? You want me to get you from stage 1 to stage 5. Is that fair?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a good metaphor for it. But I think the other problem is most people, like, they are experts in real life and in what they do every single day with the people they work with. So our challenge, and also the thing that I think I'm good at, is extracting that and somehow putting it online. So it's not enough to just keep it in your head. Like, you need to put this, figure out how we can get this out of your head and onto the internet. And that is really the goal here.
I'm wondering, so you said that, and I mean, this is a great topic. I think everybody can relate to this. You have a product manager. If you're in a SaaS company, you have a customer success lead. If you're in a publisher scenario, you have contacts, people who have been covering this beat for 20 years. If you're in a service professional scenario, like a doctor, like a lawyer, like a dentist, you have all this expertise, but you're not typically interacting with non-experts, so you don't actually know that it's special. I always when I'm talking to someone who's focused on local, I'll ask them questions like, okay, so tell me a little bit about what happens on the day of on a day of a trial at this particular courtroom. Nothing special. And then you start to dig in, and they're oh, well, this judge does this, and this person does this, and oh, sometimes this happens. And once they get into the groove, that's the content you want to publish. That's the content you want to figure out. Do you have that experience with healthcare?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think most people in general think that their story is not special, or they don't know what they would say that makes them different, or what that unique value proposition is. And so we work really hard to try and extract that out of people and ask them lots of questions. And I'll say, well, what do other people tell you about yourself? Right? Like, what are your friends, your family say, or your significant other? What do they all say that, like, you're best at, and what makes you different? And I find it's easier for people to answer that question than it is to talk about themselves in that way.
Okay, so we have to write like a blog post series about how to extract expertise out of your subject matter experts. Because I mean, my content strategist at MarketMuse, Steven's probably laughing because he's constantly asking our team members, the product team members, these questions, because it's just like, yeah, you don't just naturally say, oh yeah, this is a unique thing that only I know. It has to come from somewhere. You have to have it extracted often.
Well, so the other way, and I guess know this from being from TV news, right? So when you're on panels all the time and debating people, like, you're basically like in the middle, or the host is in the middle, and you're just fighting with them, right? So what I learned from all of this is that the best way to figure out the answer to what you're asking is to get people annoyed about something. When people are annoyed, that's when you really start understanding what they're passionate about. And and I learned that too with doing video interviews with some clients in person, right? When people are just like, oh, okay, whatever, like, you're not going to find that thing. And the thing where their blood pressure starts raising a little bit, that is actually what they're most passionate about and what should be part of their mission or their brand ethos. It's just very hard for them to communicate that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it just nailed you. Think about that. Think about for yourself. What's your pet peeve? What pains you to watch somebody else talk about? So if somebody's on a YouTube video and they're telling somebody how to do something that you're good at, what are the pet peeves that, like, you think that they're guiding somebody in the wrong direction, and you just want to, like, stop it and go, no, actually, this is the way you do it. That's the kind of thing that I'll often talk to people about. And I think that really resonates with healthcare. Like, someone is really good at a particular procedure, and they're watching somebody, tell somebody how to do it wrong or inefficiently. I think that really raises blood pressure for someone who is truly an expert, or a sneaky procedure in legal, or an SEO practice that you might not love. I think that really is a great idea. I've never heard about it that way, but it really resonates with me for sure. So like we were talking about getting media spots on national television. How frequently is that part of your strategy, or trying to get broadcast television as part of your PR versus just looking at links from digital publications?
I think the whole world has changed because of the pandemic, and that has certainly impacted national TV strategies across the board. So for example, even as a guest, I haven't, been a guest in a newsroom since March or April, whereas I was probably going into the city in those newsrooms 3 or 4 times a month before. Now we don't even know when those newsrooms are going to open back up again. So what we are telling people to do, and clients in general, is to start building out their own newsrooms in their home, because this is the new reality for PR. And I don't know if we're ever going to go back to the way that things were. And so to answer your question, I think it's certainly a component of it. And it's a mix. There's a mix of national TV, although I think a lot of the actual networks right now are pulling from their own talent that they have and relying less heavily on guests than they were previously. But I think that has also created this opportunity for this rise of live streams on YouTube and them needing guests. And we're seeing a lot of great success with clients getting on those shows and working with different creators in that regard. And, it's content. It's, at the end of the day, it's content. And so that is what people are coming to us for in different verticals. And so what I would say is, I know you mentioned like getting on Ellen or something before, and if someone said, I want to get on Ellen, what I would say is why? Like, okay, why? That's always what I say. What does it do for you if you get on? First of all, I don't even know what's happening with her show. I know she was in hot water recently, so maybe that's a bad example. But the whole point is, the question is why? What is it that you want this to do for you? So if someone said that to me, I mean, the first question I say is, who is your target audience? And usually people have a few, but who are we trying to get in front of? So let's say someone wants to build authority with referring physicians. I'm going to say that getting on the cover of a medical trade publication is infinitely more valuable for that person than getting in a consumer, talk show.
Oh yeah. And it's also what are those people, who is your target audience and what are they reading?
Yes.
Is often a question. If you're selling to, e-commerce managers at large retailers, you should be focusing on sites like ecommercemarketer.com, maybe not, footwear magazines, because you're also selling to, footwear publications. How much trust is somebody going to give you in the footwear publication versus that e-commerce marketer publication? And I think a lot of times when people are doing ABM, they look at the industry that the client or that target market or that target client appears in, and they look at those industry publications instead of doing role-specific publications. And I think you nailed it there. It's that the medical journal is infinitely more valuable than a national press item that maybe medical professionals aren't likely to watch.
So there's also this huge opportunity just for more coverage within a trade publication. I've seen people, again, get on the cover, be a feature story, get a 3-page spread. That just doesn't happen, right? You're just not going to see that. It's not as likely in other types of outlets where typically you're going to get 2 to 3 lines, right? And so also I think when you think about press, you want to, one question that people don't ask agencies when they're looking for an agency is what type of press do you want, right? So there's feature articles, there are profiles just on you specifically, and those profiles, for example, can be helpful in trying to get a Wikipedia page. When we're talking about PR for SEO, you need a very specific type of press for that. And then there's mentions. Mentions is when you want to be a subject matter expert that's frequently in the news, and you're mentioned with quotes a few times a month. And so I think people should really probably focus and ask those questions and understand that before they work with a firm as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more specific the avenue or the channel, the more likely, and more relevant you are, the more likely you are to get longer and more. To, like you said, I mean, do you really expect that somebody's going to publish something about, personalized keyword difficulty on the front page of, the New York Times? It's just not going to happen, right? And then, but if you're on Search Engine Journal, you probably are likely to get a really robust mention there. So I think that people need to be realistic. You're not seeing a 3-page spread for a medical professional on, you know, on a general topic magazine. It's just not realistic. No, I think that's a great point.
I would also say that what you're writing, again, has to support your larger press coverage goals. I know we were talking about that cancel culture article, for example, I showed you. That probably took 3 or 4 months for me to write, right? I was did a lot of research for that. I embedded rich media with different interviews I had done. But the goal of that is that it's never really finished. It's this piece that I'll just keep adding to. And I want people to understand that too. It's not just that you do this piece of content from a PR standpoint and then it's done. You should keep adding interviews into that or podcast things that relate to that topic of cancel culture. And the other thing I want to say there is that you can strategically use those pieces that you write when that comes up again in the news. I know I did that also with the Section 230 post that I wrote. So if someone says, oh, anytime you're working with a publicist, they're going to say, what are your talking points on this? So now it's there, you can send them that link here, 5,000 words. Again, your talking points should probably be 2 sentences and not 5,000 words. But the point is you can give them, 2 lines and that piece of content with rich media that supports what you're saying. Without that, it becomes much harder to get the hit.
Absolutely. I mean, just on the nose, that is one of the most important questions I will ask someone the first time I speak with them about content strategy is, does each one of your content items have a defined update frequency? Do you know how often you're going to go back and update that page? The best publishers, just here's tidbit to take away for today. If you do not have this, the best publishers have clear documented strategy for update cadence. Triggers for when they update stuff for reasons like there's a new release by this brand, there's a new change in the market, there's a trend change. They will, or I have to do this at least every quarter or every month, or I'm going out and getting press mentions, and every time I get one, I need to go back and update these 6 articles. I mean, if you don't have an update cadence structure or update strategy, I mean, you've nailed it here. You're never done. If something's successful, you're never done with that page, and you're never done building off of that page. And I think that you've really shown that with this example for sure. Yeah. With the cancel culture comment, that's a really great segue to reputation management and personal brand. How do you think about that, and what do you tell somebody who's coming to you in a bit of a crisis? I know that maybe isn't always your focus area. But I know that it's very relevant today. I thought you might have some topics.
What I say is that you should really choose wisely, and in terms of the people that you hire. And the reason I say this is because the second half of that article is called Cancel Culture Brand Management. How do you manage a brand in the age of cancel culture? And what does that mean? That means that the people you're hiring, those agency professionals, are on the front line for you of handling this and are often thrust into these battles on behalf of your brand. And so this is where, again, I think you can really see the difference of the people that say, oh, social media, I can get someone to do it for a few $100s, it doesn't really matter, versus the ones that are really spending money on strategy. Because you need to trust the people that you are, empowering or hiring to handle these battles for you. And just like if there was a battle and you're going to war, you wouldn't put, you wouldn't go to the dollar store for that. You put the best people you have. And I think the same is true right now with your social media strategy or public relations strategy. And again, I'm not just saying that as an agency, where it's sort of, you have to hire an agency and spend money. I'm saying it because you will save yourself money in the long run if you spend less on the front end and someone posts something that makes the whole thing worse, and then you're spending more money on legal and defamation and lawsuits, and then hiring people like myself to clean all of it up for you. So, that is where I'd start usually with this topic.
No, I think that's really appropriate, and it's that, and I actually a good question is when the latter that happens. Are you seeing that because they cut budget? I think in that article, there was a big, component of that is, why are you stopping? Why are you expecting that you have clarity on how much content you're going to even need to publish this year and on what topics? You don't know what's going to happen in the next, 5 hours or next week in this particular space or on these particular topics. How can you expect to already know what you're going to need to publish? And for that to not be a living thing, and then that means you're not investing in these types of communications, strategy.
Yeah, so I think in general, a lot of people just get this wrong, where they don't understand that they are the publisher of their own magazine. That magazine is called your website and your blog, period, end of story, right? You are that person today. And so when you look at the magazines you like, they do not, like you said, they're on a regular publishing schedule, not just updating, but also a publishing schedule, right? So people come to rely on when content is coming out from them. And so that doesn't mean you publish one post today and then update it, 12 months from now. It means it's frequent. And again, obviously what's going on in the world can change that. So if there's an election, right, that's going to probably alter your content strategy a little bit, or your PR strategy. But that's okay. Figure out how you can insert your keyword or your topic or your subject matter expertise into that and inject it.
No, it's right on. And what do you, so as a brand manager or giving brand management advice, how do you, a daily thing for someone who's managing a brand is managing risks. How do you, for someone who hasn't even thought that they should ever budget PR or budget for brand management or reputation management, how do you introduce the idea that there's a lot of risk, or without it seeming like you're trying to scare them?
So it's interesting. I had this conversation the other day with someone where I said, people, when they come to someone like me, they hire me for PR, but what ends up happening is that we start with PR. We build up this critical mass, but then we end up doing a lot of content on the back end of that. And so I guess that, to answer your question in a roundabout way, that's kind of how. I think to sort of have those conversations up front, it's much harder. If you say to someone, it's going to be X $1,000 a month to do content, a lot, that's a hard conversation. If you say it's X $1,000 a month to get you on XYZ show, people see value in that. Mm-hmm. But then here's the, and so someone said this, another PR said this to me the other day. He said, I'm better, meaning him, he's an agency owner, I'm better at getting new clients. You're better at keeping them. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you've diversified your offering. And so he said, maybe I should do the same. And he's never said that. And I think that was a result of the pandemic, and also because I guess he loves to go out every day and sell more than I do. So, it's probably true. But the only reason I think he's saying that is because I keep people because we do content and not only PR. And I think that agencies that only offer public relations and have no understanding of what we're talking about today, it's a ticking clock. I think in 5 years, PR is not enough to sustain those conversations where, so what did you do for me lately? You don't constantly want to be focused on the next hit. You want to figure out what is the long-term ROI for this brand. And what I have found is that content mixed with PR answers that question the best possible way for people.
How do you make sure that that doesn't slow down some of more agile content teams, where you have to get agreement? Is it, hey, if we're at a particular level of risk, then everything has to be approved, but during normal course, not everything does. How do you balance, someone's desire to just gunsling on social or post at a particular, agile cadence?
Yeah, so I think that for each client, that approval process, I think, is set up differently. We like to sort of say, if someone wants to be involved in those micro details, we're probably not going to be an ideal fit for that person. Mm-hmm. We need to have control over, what I've learned is that control over the process, your process, is important. And the more you start changing that process for each engagement, that becomes significantly less profitable, because that involves your team and your people learning new things, paying for new tools, and you end up spending more time on the project management component of it than you are on the billable hours doing what you're hired to do.
Gotcha. No, that's a great point. I was wondering where, how you separate that. For healthcare, I think you do have naturally a lot more regulations and a lot more caution than maybe some other areas. So I wasn't sure what your perspective was on that, but that makes a ton of sense. I have a question about is mentioning DA quite a bit. So how do you think about, when you're going out, are you using domain authority? And I assume you're talking about Mazda's domain authority. Are you using that as a key metric? And what more can you say about your approach there, when you're looking at publisher inbounds?
So sometimes, if it's a HARO request, for example, so HARO is Help Reporter, for those who don't know, yes, we will look at that. And I know that there are other there are other media and journalist subscription sites where they'll actually put the TA in it for you in the query. So we don't have to look that up, which is amazing. But they're usually few and far between. But I'll also just look at, again, not only the DA, but just the quality of that site and if it aligns with their topic cluster and if that's where they want to be. And also, do we fit the criteria? You know, is the client, are they every single thing that they're looking for in terms of credentials? And can they get back to them by deadline? It doesn't even matter if it's an 80 DA, but the person's not going to respond, and forget it.
Gotcha. No, that's really good feedback. And, you know, I think that may have been a softball from somebody because, yeah, I mean, that's something that we also talk with people who are using our technology a little bit more creatively to find out, does the site that they're seeking interest from actually have authority on these topics? And that's something that we do for those types of clients. But yeah, I think you've layered it on. You're doing that research and making that judgment call, you know, so that you're saying they do high quality stuff. They likely turn around requests. I think that's really important to be thinking about, not just the, not just the overall value of the site, because if they're not going to, you know, act quickly, if they're not going to actually give you the coverage that you deserve, it's not all that.
I will say this as well, you know, from a PR perspective, if anyone tells you that they can guarantee links, they're lying. They can't, right? And I know there's a ton of people in the SEO industry in general that like have services that say they can do that. I don't go anywhere near that, just because, you know, we follow the PRSA code of ethics, which is that we have no idea. And a lot of the times the journalists don't even know until something is published. So, you know, it's great to look at domain authority, but at the end of the day, it's not truly indicative of whether or not you're going to get a link. And I want people to understand that, right? So you could look at this site that is really high DA and you could get that press placement and your client mention, but it doesn't mean you're getting a link. We have no idea, the reporter has no idea, and we're going to find out when the story comes out. So don't, you know, and so that's also a problem. Sometimes when we have SEOs that come to us that want to work with us, they want this guarantee that that's going to happen. I say, no, I'm sorry, we can't work with you. We can't guarantee that.
No, exactly. Frankly, any guarantee in content marketing and search is, you know, something to shy away from. There's an unfortunate amount of it still in there. I'll leave that one there before I start ranting and turning red. That's one of my things. That's one of my things that you're extracting expertise from. Okay, so
keep going.
Comes full circle. That's awesome. Okay, I have a question about you had brought up, and either you had brought it up in your intro because we had talked about it, but about cancel culture. Well, how do you relate that, was the question. How do you relate that to PR? And is that something you bring up with folks, or is that something that you're mostly just trying to advocate for awareness?
So I think that every brand is one tweet away from being canceled. So I certainly do bring that up with clients and I let them know, sure, we can do this. Are you okay with the repercussions of that? And I'd like you to, you know, write in this email that you have approved this for liability reasons, right? And so when you actually tell someone that, I'm like, oh, maybe I don't want to do that, right? So it's just getting people to really think. And I think PRs in general, you have to think like a lawyer in a lot of these situations. And you're right, every single day is about risk management and mitigating that risk. Ideally, good PR should be about mitigating risk and not doing things that are super risky.
Did you take that quote from somebody, or is that yours, that every brand is one tweet away from being canceled? Because
I don't, that's my quote, I just gave it to you.
Okay, if you said that, you should definitely put that on a piece of paper and somehow connect it, because that is awesome. We're definitely going to be tweeting that one about this, because I mean, I think it's so true. I mean, it is, you know, you're a bad day away, you know, or a bad day away from someone having access to your social media account who you probably trust, or maybe even is on the rolls, you know, making a bad decision based on, you know, not unclear SOPs and unclear, you know, guidelines, or they're just making a bad judgment decision. And we see it all the time now, especially, and even more so in B2B now, because of, you know, historically haven't been customer facing, but with all of these, you know, channels, they are more. Do you agree with that from a B2B versus B2C perspective?
Yes, absolutely. B2B, I mean, the number one killer of most PR campaigns is the actual executive themselves. It's not these external forces, it's them inserting themselves into the campaign. And then we have to end up shifting focus to clean up what they did rather than someone else. And so I think, you know, when you hire the agency professionals, whether it's content, SEO, PR, you want to sort of, people have, like Carl Sackis talks about the swim lanes. Let them stay in their swim lane.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Don't start swimming in their lane, because then they can't swim.
No, I mean, it's really about talking to the leadership group and about each individual when they have an individual presence and saying, are you okay with how edgy this person is? Are you, it really, it is important to do that. I mean, like it matters when you hire. It also matters when, you're just examining their existing presence. And cool, well, that's a good segue for our special offers page. So you are offering a 15-minute brand audit, and I'm sure part of that is looking at some of their social media. What all goes into that in that audit for you?
Yep, so for that, what I'll do is I will look at your social media, I'll look at your press page, I will look for things like thin content like we talked about, or areas that could be improved, and I will send you back an email with those areas. And just, I guess, I don't have my email address on there, but it's kruby@rubymediagroup.com. And then I also have that updated PR ebook as well on our site, and I included the link there for you too.
That's awesome. Really excellent. I think that's all we have from questions, and this is a really amazing discussion. So what other things are you working on in the next few weeks or throughout the end of the year?
We are continuing to clean up some of these areas we talked about with this new sort of PR for SEO strategy, where we're building out individual content pages for every single press mention. So again, if someone has years of press mentions, it's a very large undertaking to do. And then also just continuing to launch this podcast transcription service, where we turn those interview transcripts into long form content for people. And I would say this, the one thing I do want to leave people with, this takeaway, I know we talked about this as well, but I want people to understand this, is that if you do this strategy right, you're going to think more carefully about what you say yes to and what you say no to. Because if you now realize that every time you say yes to a media opportunity, you're going to have to build out content around it, it's going to help you really focus on, is this actually something that I'm an expert in and want to be known for, or is this outside of my wheelhouse and it's great from a PR perspective, but it doesn't really align with the overall content clusters I want. So I just want people to think about that, and it's gonna blow your mind and really change your whole approach to PR.
That is such great advice, and I thought I connected so well with that. Early on, you kind of take every interview you can get, but now it's really what is going to be the conversation. What's that conversation going to be? Is that going to be connected to me? And you also said something very important, and it's a great segue to the bottom of this slide. It's, I wish there was a way we can prioritize what pages we're going to update. And that's what we do at MarketMuse. So that's a really great segue. We have a 1-month promo on our site. Kris, thank you so much for joining us. I think this is one of the most exciting, there's piles of takeaways from this discussion, and it's something we really haven't approached on our content strategy webinar series, and this is really a lot of net new things. And I think a lot of people only think about this from a link development standpoint, or only think about this from a news or temporal content perspective, but it all needs to be woven together. And thank you so much for showing us that today and showing the audience that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone, the whole team at MarketMuse, for making this happen. And this was really great, and I learned a lot from you too, and have such great things to say about MarketMuse in terms of, again, helping me come to these key findings. And I think that wouldn't be possible without the technology that you've created, really, because that's what made me figure all of this out.
Rich media optimization is a passion of mine, and I'm so excited that it's part of your offerings, because you're going to kill it with your organization based on all the success you've had. So yeah, thanks again. I really appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you, Jeff.